Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. I apologize, guys, ahead of time. I might have some chaos with dogs barking in a few minutes. Somebody's supposed to show up here. My dogs are going to go nuts. So we're in a rent home, and it's kind of one of those situations where you got to make the best of it. But anyway, welcome. So for those who don't know, Marty, and I've been following you on Twitter now for a while and getting a kind of a flavor for what you do. But you are a sort of, I guess, Bitcoin would be something you are fairly bullish on. I would say that's a fair statement, and you also perhaps have an interest in what we do here with trying to improve nutrition. So if you can be so kind as to give us a little bit of background information on you, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me, Doc. Background information on me: yes, I'm a Bitcoiner. I believe Bitcoin is imperative for freedom and liberty in the digital age. I studied economics in college, worked for a managed futures fund out of college for a little bit, which entailed following central bank announcements and currency markets, and sort of trying to digest what the central bankers were doing. And at the same time I was working at that fund, was learning about Bitcoin and sort of the juxtaposition of the inability of central banks to actually control anything they said they had control over, and Bitcoin's set in stone monetary policy is sort of what drove me in to Bitcoin. But as I fell further down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, came to really appreciate the freedom and liberty enabling aspects of the protocol, mainly its peer-to-peer distributed nature. And so around 2017, I started writing a daily newsletter about Bitcoin. Started out as a newsletter to educate my friends and family who were annoying me about Bitcoin. I was the Bitcoin guy in my family and friends group. So I started a newsletter, said, hey, I'm going to write about Bitcoin here. If you want to learn, stop texting me, follow the newsletter. That turned into a podcast, Tales from the Crypt, which I've been hosting since the fall of 2017. And along the way, I came into contact with the great folks at Great American Mining, which is a Bitcoin mining company, and joined their pirate ship in April of 2018. And so I'm a Bitcoiner at heart. Again, I think it's imperative. I've dedicated my life to it. I've got all my social and financial capital into the Bitcoin game, but that is a risk I'm willing to take. And then I do appreciate everything that you do, Doc, to basically educate people about alternative diets and lifestyles. I've actually been consuming a lot more steak and a lot less carbs since I've become acquainted with the carnivore community. Actually, funnily enough, via Bitcoiners like Saifedean Ammous and Michael Goldstein.
Yeah, and my regret is, with Safe, because Safe was telling me about, I had dinner with Safe about 3 or 4 years ago. We were talking about Bitcoin, and I kind of just was still not really sure. And then I kind of finally, kind of started to get into that, put a little bit of capital in there. And, it's so far I've been, pretty pleased with it. But, like I said, it is a risk. And I think people need to know that there's no guarantees in anything. And apologize, the dogs are in the background. But, let me ask you just, just to start with, there's some questions in here from one of our folks. I want to give them an opportunity. I've been reading. I've read Safe's book, and I've been looking at this stuff. And I kind of have maybe a passing knowledge of this at least. But it's always nice to have experts on here. So there's somebody asking about what's the difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Which do you buy, acid or both? I know kind of the Bitcoin philosophy on that is how it's Bitcoin or bust. But tell us a little bit about the difference between that, and I'm going to go shut my dogs up. Sorry.
Yeah, so for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, give a little history lesson on that. So there was, as in leading up to 2017, so like 2015, 2016, 2017, there was a great debate in the Bitcoin world about how do you scale the network? Like, how do you make sure that more and more people can use the Bitcoin network and actually take advantage of the freedom enabling properties that it gives the world. And so
I put the dogs in the back patio, and I'm actually working in a conference room. I'm Sean. Nice to meet you.
There were basically two schools of thought.
Then afterwards,
I'll wait till they're done talking.
Well, maybe downstairs. Downstairs would be better, I guess. Okay, perfect. And if it's okay, can you make the sheets or take the sheets off the bed? Thank you very much.
Yeah, so there was basically two schools of thought of how to scale the network. One was, hey, let's just make the amount of transactions that can be fit in a block larger by increasing the size of block. So literally the amount of data that you can fit inside a block. And so that was the Bitcoin Cash crew. And then Bitcoin, what it decided to do is like, hey, we're actually going to scale in layers. Like if you increase the block size to allow more transactions, yes, that is possible, but you sacrifice the ability for individuals to download the state of the blockchain, the history of the blockchain, and actually validate consensus rules. And so again, Bitcoin's value is driven by the fact that it is a peer-to-peer distributed protocol. And to be a peer-to-peer distributed protocol, it means individuals have to be able to download the state and the history of the ledger and validate the rules for themselves. So everything with Bitcoin comes with trade-offs. And so basically with the Bitcoin Cash, specifically the trade-off they made is like, hey, we want more transactions per block, so we're going to increase the block size. I think it's like 8 megabytes now. And Bitcoin said, all right, we're not going to do that. We're going to scale in layers. We're going to build layers on top of Bitcoin and keep the protocol layer very tight and very small from a data perspective so individuals can access the blockchain. And I mean, that fork happened in August of 2017. So we're approaching 4 years since that happened. And I think the market has decided pretty vehemently that the Bitcoin has the right approach to scaling, which is make sure that you have as little data as possible at the protocol layer so individuals can access it and verify it so it's sufficiently distributed from state attacks in the future. And you can just look at the network hash rate of Bitcoin compared to Bitcoin Cash, and it's orders and orders and orders of magnitude larger. There's basically nobody mining Bitcoin Cash. It's not a secure network compared to Bitcoin. And then obviously you can look at the price of the different projects, and Bitcoin is significantly higher as well.
One of the, I guess well, not criticism, but one of the thoughts around Bitcoin. Well, maybe one of the criticisms is too simple. You don't need sophisticated an economics degree. You don't need to have a Wall Street background to invest in Bitcoin. I mean, you just basically buy something and don't sell it. Basically, there's this Bitcoin plebe, meme out there that these guys, just these average guys that are doing just no real work are taking on these financial giants, and the financial giants are getting pissed off about it. And you just saw Charlie Munger thinking that Bitcoin is the most disgusting thing that ever happened to the financial world. What's the sort of walk me through that, or how this is sort of the everyman thing that changes? How does it dramatically upswing? How is it disruptive? Like, with a meat-based diet, we've got this dogma: you've got to eat grains, and you've got to eat 60% of your calories from carbs, and it has to be balanced. You got to eat your fruits and vegetables. We're saying, no, F that, just eat a bunch of steak and you're good. I mean, Bitcoin you can see the analogy there. So can you walk us through that, maybe that sort of analogy with regard to Bitcoin and the general broader financial market?
Yeah. So again, going back to earlier in my career when I was following central bankers, I mean, if you like, it's so complex, like the way they have the monetary system set up, and Bitcoin basically saying like, hey, we don't need to do all this to have a monetary system. We should actually be running a sound monetary system because it actually helps individuals. So that's why I like to say Bitcoin is a monetary good for the common man by the common man. It's a peer-to-peer network. And so it basically takes all the complexity out of simply preserving purchasing power over time, where today, due to the nature of the fiat monetary system, where very few people have control of the levers of the monetary system, mainly the Fed and the banks and its primary system. So you have the 12 Fed chairmen, or the 12 presidents of the Federal Reserve Bank system. You have the Fed chairman, and then they have their Fed window, which is where they buy assets. They basically create money and buy assets from primary dealers, which are the big banks and other entities in the financial market, and they have control of the monetary system. Like, they decide how many units are produced and distributed to the market at any given point in time. That's a very, very small group of people that have a very undue influence on money, which is arguably the most important tool in the world, is 1/2 of every transaction. And so the effects of very few people having control of the monetary system at this particular point in the financial system actually makes the common man worse off. They have uh, access to what's called the Kantian effect, where when money is created, those closest to the spigot benefit unduly compared to those further away from the spigot. So the banks that get first access to the money are then able to turn that around, loan it out at interest, and profit from that, and speculate in financial markets, real estate markets even. And then by the time the money matriculates through the economy and gets to the common man, he's not able to participate in that value accretion in the asset markets. And by the time it's reached him, prices for consumer goods have gone up, and the common man is just caught in this hamster wheel trying to make more money or push their assets into yield bearing financial assets like stocks, bonds, real estate, whatever it may be. And so Bitcoin, yes, it's very simple, but it's saying like, hey, we're creating a monetary system that makes it much easier. You have cap supply 21 million. You know that your slice of the Bitcoin pie is always going to be whatever it is that you would attain at any given point in time. There's nobody that's able to debase that and take advantage of that Kantian effect. And so, yeah, it is very simple, and it does almost seem too good to be true to a lot of people. But this is the way the monetary systems have worked throughout most of human history. Has been backed by hard assets to a certain degree, and only in the last century has the gold standard truly been bastardized due to centralization via holding in bolts and central banks. And the physical nature of gold really neutered it in the last century, and Bitcoin is sort of giving monetary goods back to the people.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, if you go back to, I'm just looking at Safe's book, he talks about, the history of money, and, he started out with, some giant rocks that people thought were valuable on some island, and then it's beads, and then it goes through the different materials, and he's looking at, stock to flow ratios, and silver and gold come in there, and then we start to come off the gold standard, early 19th century, and then Nixon takes us off in 71 completely, and gold is illegal, you can't hold it for a while, and then then eventually you can get it back. But money is kind of whatever you decide is valuable. And some people understand, they can say, I can hold gold, I can make shiny things out of it, I can do some electronic stuff, it's inherently valuable. But then they say, well, Bitcoin is, it's I can't hold it, I can't touch it. But at the same time, we look at most of our monetary system right now, we're paying with credit cards. Who's to say this credit card and the digital stuff that's attached to it is valuable? We sort of assume that's going to happen. And so this is one of the criticisms with Bitcoin is, it's not something that we can touch or hold or feel. And so what is your response to when people talk about that?
Yeah, and I understand where it comes from, but Bitcoin's value is derived from its peer-to-peer distributed nature. This is a bit crass, but Bitcoin is fuck you money, in the sense of, hey, the government wants to say that you can't send money from the United States to your family member in Venezuela. Fuck you. I'm going to use Bitcoin. I don't need you. Like, I can send it peer to peer. Hey, we need to target 2% inflation year on year to create price stability. That's what the Fed tells you. Like, F you. I'm going to use Bitcoin, hard cap supply, and on and on and on. So Bitcoin's value is derived from the fact that nobody can control it. And that has a lot of inherent value, especially in this day and age, in the digital age. Again, I say Bitcoin is imperative for freedom and liberty in the digital age, because just look around, everybody's getting deplatformed from social media apps, from payment processors. Like, that, it is literally impossible for anybody to deplatform somebody from the Bitcoin network. If you're using the protocol the way it should be, actually directly interacting with it and sending transactions in a peer-to-peer fashion, that cannot be stopped. The US government can't come in and say you can't do that. PayPal can't come in and say you can't send money. Marty can't send money to Dr. Baker. Like, you can't. Like, that is literally impossible. If you send me a Bitcoin address, I'll always be able to get you Bitcoin. And so that's where the value is derived from. And then on top of that, that peer-to-peer nature is probably the base layer of the value. And then the monetary properties of Bitcoin, the token. Like, again, there will only ever be 21 million. It's extremely scarce when you compare it to other assets. Its stock to flow, like you mentioned, is extremely high. And that makes it a better money than most. It's extremely divisible. There's 100 million units in one Bitcoin. The units are called Satoshis, or sats, as we like to call them. So you can divide it up into very small pieces. You can send it over the internet. You can hold it in your head. And so all these properties combine, the peer-to-peer nature, the scarce nature, the visibility, the ability to send over the internet, the ability to hold it in your head, just make it infinitely, vastly superior to any other monetary good on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just looking at the chat. We've got some people that are Bitcoin pro, and we got some people that think it's nutty and crazy, and it's going to go to zero tomorrow, and you're wasting your time, and it's a pure Ponzi scheme, and so on and so forth. And I mean, even within the financial world, you've got Elon Musk, Michael Saylor, and a number of companies have now put a significant part of their holdings within Bitcoin. We see a lot of banks that are starting to create interactions with Bitcoin. We've seen that some have come out negative. I think what is it, HSBC in Great Britain saying you can't return your money. One of the other things is we hear the concern about these supercomputers. These quantum computers are going to be able to hack the hack Bitcoin and take your money or something like that. I guess my thought is well, I mean, if a quantum computer can do that, they can shut down the power grid. They can steal everything. I mean, steal your credit card. So I mean, it's kind of almost a interesting argument to make that. What are your response to the thought about it's susceptible to this, and it's going to be illegal? The IMF is going to outright ban it. How do you get around that?
Yeah, so the point you made about quantum computing is very true. Like, if quantum computing comes, we got much bigger problems than Bitcoin. And with that being said, like, Bitcoin is a ledger. You can download the state at any given block height, and if we, let's say, did need to restart after a quantum computing attack, you could agree on a block height and just restart from there. And on top of that, Bitcoin's already quantum resistant to a certain extent. Like, the way the new address structures are being made is such that they would be resistant to a quantum attack to break the private public key pairs. In terms of like the IMF or governments banning it, that's another. Again, Bitcoin is a distributed network, so there are individuals running the consensus rules of Bitcoin all throughout the world. The actual copies of the Bitcoin ledger are copied all throughout the world, and so to actually kill Bitcoin, you'd have to go in physically to people's houses and unplug their nodes and do it at the same time and in a swift movement. And if you are paying attention to geopolitics at all, it seems very unlikely that the global world powers are going to get together and do something in a swift, concise, coordinated action. And Bitcoin can't be banned. So it's got this whole concept of jurisdictional arbitrage. Like, if the United States or China were to ban Bitcoin and actually earnestly attempt to do it, you'd have other jurisdictions like, hey, we want intellectual capital, we want financial capital to be interacting and stimulating our economy. So, hey, Bitcoiners, if you're going to shut it down in the US, come here. You can run your nodes, you can run Bitcoin here. So that game theoretical jurisdictional arbitrage that exists is also a protection for the network. Like, if somebody tries to ban it in one country, another country is going to welcome Bitcoiners with open arms, and it's like a hydra. You can attempt to kill it, but again, its distributed nature makes it extremely, extremely hard to kill. And I would say, at this point, 12 years in, getting close to impossible to kill.
India has banned it. I guess. I mean, how's it going in India? I mean, I assume there's people in India still using it, even though the government has banned it. Is that fair to say, or no?
Yeah, India's banned it. China's banned it. Nigeria's banned it. And if you actually go to the P2P exchanges where people just meet in person and exchange cash for Bitcoin, the volume goes parabolic after the government's banned Bitcoin. Like, India's banned gold in the past too, and gold is held. Like, I think Indians per capita hold the most amount of gold in the world. Again, these attempts to ban are futile. I mean, we live in the digital age. The fact that I can hold Bitcoin, the state of Bitcoin, I can hold Bitcoin on, I've got it right here, like on this little USB drive. It's got Bitcoin on it. The notion that a government would be able to go physically in India, like 1.3 billion people, and actually shut Bitcoin down is logistically infeasible.
Yeah, one of the other major criticisms now, we're entering the coronavirus pandemic, whatever your opinion on that. That's sort of, we can see it kind of winding down. I think its peak of whatever is kind of going away from that, and now we're going to be going into the age of the climate change emergencies is the next thing. And one of the things people say is, well, Bitcoin, you got to use a lot of electricity. It takes as much as a small country to mine Bitcoin. I know you have some insight into that, and I know you can talk about that American mining company, and I've seen some stuff where, well, interesting ways of harnessing energy to mine Bitcoin. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you're a Bitcoin miner, your goal as a company, as an individual or group of people who wants to run a profitable company, is to drive your cost of power production, your price per kilowatt hour consumed, down as low as possible. And so that drives Bitcoin miners to go to very remote areas and find untapped energy resources. So a lot of the energy that's used to mine Bitcoin is stranded renewables like geothermal and hydroelectric. At Great American Mining, we found our cheap energy source on oil fields. So you get to well pads, particularly up here in the Bakken in New York, or excuse me, in America, not New York, North Dakota, where they have strict flaring regulations, and oil producers, they poke a hole in the ground. It's not just oil comes out, gas comes out as well. If you don't have pipeline infrastructure set up to get to your well pad, you literally have to burn the natural gas that's coming out of the ground and flare it to make sure that you're within EPA regulations. And if you flare too much, you actually have to shut down your oil production. So we show up and we say, hey, don't flare that gas. We will pipe it to generators and create electricity that then power our Bitcoin miners to mine Bitcoin. Don't waste that gas. We will actually use it to produce positive economic value. And so Bitcoin miners on their journey for cheap, scalable energy, you'll find that they're hooking into these nooks and crannies across the planet that basically take advantage of stranded energy sources that were previously untapped. And in terms of energy efficiency, this is an incredible boon for humanity. Like we're becoming extremely energy efficient because Bitcoin miners are incentivized to go and make sure that we're not wasting energy. And so, yes, Bitcoin does use a lot of electricity. It converts a lot of energy into electricity to produce hashes to produce Bitcoin. This is a very good thing. It's making us more energy efficient. And the secondary and third order knock-on effects of actually ushering in a sound monetary system will be extremely good for humanity and being more efficient with energy. Just because you're more efficient with capital allocation, you're only expend energy under a sound monetary system on things that are worth building and things that will last.
I often, see people. It's various different topics. It's some sort of problem in the world, and then the answer is Bitcoin fixes this. Can you talk about how? I mean, because most people, if we're looking at different systems in the world, how can a sound monetary system, does it limit the amount of war we go to? I mean, what does Bitcoin theoretically fix, and why do you believe that is so?
I mean, again, it fixes the money, and the money is fucked right now. It's broken. We broke the money, so Bitcoin fixes the money, and again, in as a result, will fix the world. And so, how does that happen? So, money's broken, and money again is the most important tool. It's the pricing mechanism for economic activity. Like, how do you price economic activity when you have a fiat monetary system where these governments and these central banks can print cash ex nihilo and then go spend it how they will? They're going to poorly allocate capital. They reduce the opportunity cost of capital allocation because they can just print more money if they don't have it to allocate. Under a sound monetary system with Bitcoin, it increases the opportunity cost of capital allocation and creates more accurate price signals, because when you do go to allocate capital, the opportunity cost is so high that you're going to make sure that you're allocating it efficiently into things that are actually going to be productive and get you a return on your investment. Whereas in a world in which money can just be printed out of thin air, you really don't have that opportunity cost. So you waste capital and you misallocate capital on a mass scale.
Yeah, and I guess maybe there's a room for a explanation of the term fiat money. Many people aren't familiar with that term. In the United States, we're going to be doing all these $1 trillion stimulus packages. Where's that money coming from? I mean, what does fiat money mean? And can you talk how Bitcoin is not fiat money?
Yeah, so fiat just means by decree. And so we live under a fiat monetary system. Particularly, I'll just focus on the United States because we have to use the U.S. dollar by decree to pay taxes. And many people who have tried to create alternative currencies in the past, like Liberty Reserves, e-gold, BitGold, I think it was another, have been shut down because they were centralized currencies competing with the U.S. dollar, and they were not decreed by the government. So fiat means by decree. You are forced to use this currency to pay your taxes by the government. And how Bitcoin differs from that, it's not by decree. It's a pure market-driven, free market-driven monetary good, where it's not being decreed on people. It's completely opt-in. You don't have to use Bitcoin if you don't want to, but it exists, and the market can basically decide like, hey, this is a better money. It's not being decreed on anybody, and that's another beauty of Bitcoin. It's completely opt-in. If Bitcoin scares you, you think it's too risky, you don't have to use it, but it's always there for you if you do want to use it.
Yeah, what we're seeing is a number of we have what called what is it, CBDC, central bank digital currencies are being developed. So a lot of these central banks are actually getting into producing their own cryptocurrency, I suppose. And then there's concern that this governments are going to regulate all of these crypto situations, and it's going to somehow impact Bitcoin in a certain way. How do you see that playing out?
Again, we have two paths we can go down. We can go down the path of the Chinese and U.S. intelligence agencies surveillance system creating social credit scores that basically cattle herd us into digital panopticons. We can go down the Bitcoin route. So CBDCs are essentially just trying to recreate what's going on in China with their social credit scores and bring it globally. So you'll only be allowed to use a wallet that's certified by the Federal Reserve or the U.S. government. They'll be tracking your transactions and who you interact with. They'll probably airdrop money into your digital wallet and tell you, hey, we're giving you this much money. You can only spend it in this amount of time, and you can only spend it on these types of goods. Like, this is the type of control these CBDCs will have over your spending and economic interactions. And so juxtaposing that with Bitcoin again, which is peer to peer, there's no middleman to say, hey, you can't interact with Dr. Baker, you can't interact with others. So yeah, CBDC is an incredible surveillance tool that will be used to control people, whereas Bitcoin is free and open source, peer to peer. So again, it's just taking the juxtaposition of the fiat monetary system and the Bitcoin world and turning it up to 11.
Another one of the concerns is liquidity. It's like I can't, it's hard for me to go buy groceries with Bitcoin right now. I can't go down to the store and buy it. I mean, I can buy a Tesla apparently. I can buy some other things, but talk about some. I mean, I don't really understand. I keep hearing about the Lightning Network, and I don't even know what that really does. And how do we utilize it in our day-to-day lives? Assuming for those that actually want to spend it. I mean, I see an argument being made, just accumulate it as an asset and then borrow against it with whatever currencies there against with dollars, and use it as a basically borrowing tool. I mean, I've seen Michael Saylor make that argument. You just hold as much Bitcoin, you never let it go, and you use that to borrow whatever currency, dollars, presumably. What about the liquidity and strategies for utilizing this?
Yeah. So Bitcoin can be used as store value or as a medium of exchange, or even a unit account by some people. Bitcoin enables certain properties: store value, medium of exchange, unit of account. And the way people use Bitcoin will vary. And the way people predominantly use Bitcoin will vary over time. So right now, people mainly use it as a savings account. You can't deny that. Like, people are just buying Bitcoin, holding it, and waiting for it to appreciate in value because they believe that it could be significantly higher in value because of the potential to become a new reserve asset of the world. If it is going to become a reserve asset, that's not going to settle at $56,000 wherever it is today. But again, that does not preclude you from using it as a medium of exchange. I use it as a medium of exchange literally every day. So if you go to my website, tftc.io, we have a contribute page, we have a dime bag page, and people can send us Bitcoin whenever they want. And so the the question of like, how does Bitcoin become more of a medium of exchange, more of a transactional currency? It just depends on merchants and individual users deciding to accept it as their currency. So there's plenty of open source payment processors out there. The one I use is called BTC Pay Server. So you can download BTC Pay Server, you connect a hardware wallet with your addresses, and you can throw it on your website and say, hey, I want to begin accepting Bitcoin, and you can. And in terms of the Lightning Network, so again, the Lightning Network is the second layer to Bitcoin's protocol layer. Again, we want to keep Bitcoin's protocol layer as robust and lean as possible. So you keep the block small, and then the nature of that is going to make transactions at the protocol layer they're akin to settlement transactions between central banks that would used to do settlement in gold. And so those transactions are going to be a little bit more expensive, and they're going to take a little bit more time to make sure that they're completely secure. On top of that, we're building the Lightning Network, which allows you to lock Bitcoin up in what's called a payment channel. And then within that payment channel, you can send Bitcoin instantly and extremely cheaply. And so you can get onboarded directly onto the Lightning Network without ever interacting with the protocol layer as well. So when you're on that second layer Lightning Network, you can receive very small amounts of Bitcoin for very cheap fees. So another example is Adam Carey, who is the inventor of podcasts. He's creating what's called the Podcasting 2.0 platform. And when people listen to my Tales from the Crypt podcast, they actually have the ability to stream me Satoshis via the Lightning Network. So it's called the value for value model. So I post my podcast on my RSS feed. I put my Lightning public node into my RSS feed, and then certain apps that are Bitcoin wallets as well can pick that up, and people listen to my podcast via that app can stream me fractions of a penny per minute listen to my podcast. If they're getting value out of my podcast, they can say, hey, I want to send Marty 10 sats, which is 5/10 of a penny right now per minute I listen. And so in terms of Bitcoin actually being able to be used as a transactional currency, that can happen today. That does happen today. But again, it's not the predominant use case, just because most people think it's going to appreciate in value. And so they'd rather hold it and then spend it when the market cap is more stable.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been one of the concerns with some people. They're worried about the volatility. I mean, you see it swinging 10, 15%, in a day sometimes, and so for some people that's too much volatility. But as the price, I mean, the price now, 50 something thousand, 50, I think it's peaked at 64,000. I think it's around 56, 57. Today when I woke up, I check it, a couple times a day just to see, just for fun. But so a lot of people are saying, well, that's pretty expensive to buy something. You can't even get one Bitcoin. You got to spend 50 some $1,000 just to get a single Bitcoin. You mentioned now it's about Satoshis, which are, and Becky's saying, it's 57,219, 57,218.98 right now. So there are people that are projecting this is going to go to $1 million a Bitcoin, and there's other people that's going to predict this it's going to go to zero at some point. But one of the things that is kind of putting it in perspective, when we look at the capitalization or how much money's in Bitcoin, it's well over $1 trillion right now. So it's larger than like Visa or MasterCard, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? And where do you see it going? As far as people saying it's still very early, even though the price is over $50,000, very early, because only 0.1% of institutions have started to adopt this. And so there's so much room for growth. So where do you see it going in the next, I know it's impossible to predict the future. Where's it going in the next 5 years in your estimation?
I'd like to extend that timeline to 10 years. I think
right,
it's
low time preference. Okay, let's just do whatever. I know low time preference.
I think it's going to be worth millions of dollars in today's purchasing power by the end of this decade, potentially tens of millions 2-3 decades from now in today's purchasing power. And again, it's because people will realize that Bitcoin as a monetary good, as a store of value, is superior to everything from real estate, stocks, bonds, cars, whatever people are storing their value. And again, people are storing their value in things like real estate, stocks, and bonds because they can't store their value in their money because it's constantly getting debased. And so I'm a bull. I've got all my social, financial, and reputational capital into Bitcoin. So take what I say with that grain of salt, I guess. But again, I only do this because I think I understand the innovation that Bitcoin presents and how powerful it is against attacks on the network, and how important it is to succeed and compared to its competitors. If its competitors like the US dollar, the CBDCs succeed, that is a pretty shitty future for humanity. I do not want my son and future children to live in a world in which CBDCs dominate, in which they're literally thrown into a digital panopticon where everything they do is surveilled, judged, and curtailed based on what the whims of central bankers or politicians are. And so, yes, if Bitcoin is successful, which I think it will be, I think it is successful. Like Bitcoin works today, it's succeeding today. It has for 12 years. And the upward price potential is pretty significant from here. And in terms of that unit bias, like, oh my gosh, it's 57 $819 right now. Like, it's way too expensive. Again, you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. So what we try to do at Tales from the Crypt is change the unit bias. People see the high price tag of Bitcoin, like, I can never afford that. And so we say stack sats instead. So like stack Satoshis. Again, there's 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin. And once you change that unit bias from like actually having whole Bitcoins to just stacking sats, it really makes the accumulation game easier. And from a mental perspective, you don't feel like you're falling behind as much. And so right now, $1 will get you 1,749 sats. And so $100, we have 100x that. And don't again, treat it as a savings account. That's what I do. And again, this is not financial advice. I'll just tell you what I do. I treat it as a savings account, and then I spend dollars when I need to spend dollars, and anything left over, I just put into Bitcoin constantly. And I've been doing that for quite a long time now, and it's treated me well. But again, you can't. A lot of people get jolted by the high price of Bitcoin and say, "Oh, it's too expensive for me." It's not. You can buy dollars worth of Bitcoin. You can work for Bitcoin. You don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin at once.
So I've got seen a number of questions. There's some people that you've piqued their interest in, and they're wondering, well, how do I do it? How do I mechanically do that? I know there are a number of apps and companies that allow you to buy cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. Are there some that you think are better than others? I mean, obviously there's a lot of ones out there, and some may be more effective than others. And then, there's always a thought that, now we're going to put it into cold storage. Like you showed your USB card. I mean, what is it? How does the normal sort of newbie get into it? What's a nice way to do that for most people?
Disclaimer: this company is a sponsor of my podcast, but Cash App. I mean, Cash App's like the number one downloaded finance app in the US, at least. So if you have Cash App, you may not know this, but you can scroll over a few tabs on your app and get access to Bitcoin. You can buy as little as $1 there. Beware of their withdrawal limits. I believe they have a $5,000 withdrawal limit a week. So if you're buying a large amount of Bitcoin on the Cash App, be wary of those withdrawal limits. If you're going to withdraw to cold storage, beyond Cash App, there's river.com, ShawnBaker, Kraken. I'm not a huge fan of Coinbase, but you can certainly buy Bitcoin there. Gemini. These are all reputable, regulated in exchanges that I don't think are going to be running away with your Bitcoin. There's OTC Desk if you want to buy in bulk. Unchained Capital has one. Paxos, Cumberland.io, Genesis. So if you need to buy in bulk, you can do that as well. And in terms of like cold storage, it's a process. Again, Bitcoin is a digital bearer asset, and it demands extreme ownership. If you're going to take possession of your Bitcoin, you have to make sure you know what you're doing. And so what I recommend when you're ready to take that leap from having your Bitcoin on an exchange to cold storage, you start small. So there's levels. So if you have a phone, start with a little mobile wallet. I like Blue Wallet. Blue Wallet.io is their website. And you basically get comfortable producing a private key, public key pair with a seed phrase that backs it up. And then you send small amounts from the exchange to the Blue Wallet, like 20, $50 at a time, if you will. And you just send it back and forth and get comfortable receiving and sending transactions to and from personal storage. And then once you're comfortable with that and you have a significant amount of capital, I'd say over $5,000 in Bitcoin, you may want to start thinking about hardware wallets, and there's plenty out there, or not plenty, there's probably like three that I would recommend. Cold Card, which is a little bit more technically advanced, and then Trezor, which is a little bit more user friendly, and Ledger as well, which is more user friendly. But Cold Card, I think, is the if you're technically savvy enough to spin that up and use that, and I would recommend that. But again, there's nothing wrong with the Trezor or a Ledger as well. But again, practice makes perfect. You have to understand what you're doing. Again, Bitcoin is a digital bearer asset. If you lose your private keys and lose your wallet, you're shit out of luck. You're going to lose your Bitcoin. There's services on Chain Capital. Again, they have a service where you can set up what's called a multi-sig transaction, where you get 3 wallets, you hold 2. Unchained holds 1, and to move your Bitcoin, you need a signature from 2 of the wallets. And so you could lose one of your wallets and your private key, and Unchained will always protect theirs. And so that's a little bit redundancy in security. There's many ways to do it. I'm rambling now, but I would recommend practice makes perfect. Start with a mobile wallet like Blue Wallet, get comfortable sending small amounts of Bitcoin. Once you do that, advance to a hardware wallet. And then once you're comfortable with that, a multi-sig setup is probably the most secure for the long term if you're securing large amounts of Bitcoin and just want to hold it. But yeah, it gets easier over time. That's something I was extremely scared when I first started holding my Bitcoin, but it's actually a great way to understand the power of Bitcoin. And so, like, for me personally, my aha moment where I was like, oh crap, this is the future, I'm going to put some more money into this, was I was traveling to the Virgin Islands in like 2016 and 2015, 2016, I forget when. I went down there, I ran out of cash. And like, so I was like in my early 20s and spent way too much money, or spent more money. I didn't know how expensive it was in the Virgin Islands. Like, oh shit, I ran out of money. Luckily, I had a Bitcoin seed phrase in my journal. And I get written down, just like, all right, if I ever get in a pinch, I can use this. And so I actually spun up a wallet, put my seed phrase in, had access to my Bitcoin, sent my Bitcoin to Coinbase at the time, which is the exchange I was using, and was able to sell Bitcoin into my bank account. So like those 12 words saved me in a pinch. I traveled with them. I used that. I spun up a open source wallet, put the Bitcoin seed phrase in there. My Bitcoin magically appeared. And then I sent some Bitcoin to my exchange, was able to sell and send to my bank account. And that power that those 12 words, that financial access that those 12 words gave me, was like, holy crap, this thing's big. I could travel around the world with 12 words in my head and always have access to money.
Yeah, and I think, that's the thing that some people maybe are concerned about, the technical requirements for most people don't have, going off the exchange. And then there have been dramatic examples of people that have lost quite a bit of value in Bitcoin. They just forget their phrase, or they lose their quote storage, and they've been out of even millions of dollars. I mean, obviously that would be disastrous for most people. What has been over the last, obviously, this has been going on for 12 years now, and there's obviously some early adopters. And so what has been the rate of growth, not just in the value of Bitcoin, but in the number of consumers or people that are holding it now over the last, couple of years?
Don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's been growing pretty exponential. I mean, you can just look at exchange volumes, exchange signups. Coinbase publicly announces their signups. I think the latest estimates that 100 million people hold Bitcoin around the world, which is pretty significant, maybe more. In America, tens of millions, I believe. But yeah, I like to look at adoption in places where Bitcoin's most desperately needed, like Venezuela and Nigeria. And you go to the peer-to-peer exchange volume there and the number of people using those exchanges, and they've been going exponential as well. They're hitting all-time high records month on month this year, particularly. So yeah, I think adoption is increasing significantly. And again, that's a product of many things. Obviously, people with bad currencies around the world literally need access to Bitcoin. People were sanctioned around the world need access to Bitcoin to send money or receive money from family members abroad. And then on top of that, the exchange infrastructure has become significantly more robust over the last 4 to 5 years. So there's more on ramps that people are signing up for. I mean, yesterday there was a big announcement from NYDIG and FIS that they're going to give access to 300 plus US banks customers to buy Bitcoin directly from their bank accounts. So the on ramps are becoming more robust. The way in which people can access Bitcoin is becoming much easier. And then obviously, I believe 2020 was a cultural tipping point for Bitcoin, where you had the Paul Tudor Jones of the world and the Michael Saylors of the world throwing their weight behind Bitcoin. You had huge athletes saying that they want to demand to be paid in Bitcoin. And at the same time, you have the Federal Reserve printing money. Neil Kashkari coming out and saying that they can print as much cash as possible, and people starting to question, like, all right, if they can print all this cash, why are we even paying taxes? So last year, you had a culmination of Bitcoin acceptance juxtaposed with the questioning of the traditional monetary system. And again, I don't know any exact numbers, but just from, you can look at Google Trends and other things, and it's hard to deny that interest in Bitcoin and adoption of Bitcoin has picked up significantly over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, what is the as far as some of the big companies that are getting into this, can you I mean, I've seen like some of the large banks. I think Visa has gotten into Bitcoin. Can you explain what does that mean as far as how we're going to be using Bitcoin?
In terms of in terms of how we're, again, that's the beauty of it. Like, you can use Bitcoin however you want. These large companies, a lot of them are using it as a store of value, a treasury asset, to sit along cash, because they don't believe that their cash is going to retain value over time. So they're using it like that. The Visa getting in, like, maybe they can try to um, build tools for people to access Bitcoin, but I believe they would create walled garden tools that really wouldn't be advantageous to use, because again, they'd just be inserting their ability to censor transactions into the system, or into that, not into the Bitcoin system. But I imagine whatever they would build would be similar to the payment processing tools they build now, which have that ability to censor. So Visa competes with the Lightning Network. Maybe they can pivot and leverage open source technologies to build for people. Yeah, I think as more and more people get into it, again, it makes Bitcoin more legitimate in the eyes of the masses, because for whatever reason, humans are very social beings. They look for social cues to basically be okay with something. And so that's happening with Bitcoin over the last year. Is you have a bunch of very prominent and respected individuals and companies giving it the okay. And so with that, more people are going to accept it. And then in terms of how it's adopted, uh, we'll see. We'll see how it affects. Again, I don't think any central bank or traditional financial system is going to create centralized products that actually appease people, compared to like the open source projects that are being built for Bitcoin.
Safety's book, the Bitcoin standard. We've been on a gold standard now, where basically many central banks hold U.S. currency in reserve. That's kind of the framework which everything's compared to. Do you see at some point, Bitcoin being the standard, and how would that work? And do you see that, you might have the dollar backed by Bitcoin? Is that a foreseeable future?
Yeah, no, I believe we'll transition to a Bitcoin standard. And so again, when we're in work very intimately with the oil and gas industry in with Great American Mining. But like, I think that once you see the international oil trade begin to settle international trades in Bitcoin, that's when you're going to start to see like the power of Bitcoin. I think that's going to happen within the next decade. Is essentially what we have now. The international currency system is a system of barter. Foreign exchange is bartering for currencies, and it adds friction to international trade. So the petrodollar is a perfect example of that. If nations around the world want to buy oil, the large portion of them, they're beginning to trend away from this, but up until this point, if you want to buy oil, you had to convert your native currency to dollars and then purchase oil from the Middle East. Like, it's what the petrodollar is that drives a lot of demand for the dollar, but that adds friction. You have to bear those foreign exchange costs, the fees that come with that, and the exchange rate difference that comes with that as well. under a Bitcoin standard, it doesn't make any sense to do anything like that. It's like, hey, you have oil, I have Bitcoin. I'm just going to send Bitcoin directly to you. Send me the oil. Like you don't need to do these barter trades and currencies to make this happen. And so, yeah, I do think we'll live under a Bitcoin standard in the future, and it's because it just reduces friction in trade. Like you don't need to have native currencies in each country. It doesn't make sense to, because you have this perfect monetary good in Bitcoin. You can just trade direct peer to peer with that instead of having to insert a fiat currency and then exchange that for another fiat currency to do international trade. It sort of bleeds borders and of FX trade in that way.
If assuming that's the case, and again, there's no guarantee there will be, it's still speculative, but who would stand to significantly lose from that scenario where the Bitcoin became the standard, and what can they do, or what would they be willing to do to prevent that in your estimation?
I mean, the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, I mean, they have the most to lose. The U.S. dollar is the reserve currency of the world. But it's also presents a great opportunity. Like if the U.S. government and was to pivot and say, all right, and I think they're actually doing this without saying so, by letting Bitcoin thrive within the U.S. borders and industry thrive to a certain extent within its borders. Like I think the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, notices that the monetary policy that they've embarked on for the last 5 decades has actually put them into a corner that they can't get out of. Like they literally can't raise interest rates over a certain point, or they'll default on the debt that they've accrued, and they just have to keep printing their way out. And so they have two choices. They can either overtly default on their debt, which is politically untenable, or they can default via debasement, which is the path they've chosen. And so the U.S. dollar system, reserve system, has the most to lose, but it also, the U.S. has the most to gain from it's a weird catch-22. They have the most to lose, but they also have the most to gain by being sort of accommodative to Bitcoin industry and Bitcoiners within their borders. Like it's actually a great pressure release valve and lifeboat for the U.S. dollar reserve system. Like it could be a light default if we're able to successfully and peacefully transition to a world in which a lot of Americans are holding Bitcoin. Yeah, it's pretty heavy, but like you can't. And people are like, "Oh, Bitcoiners are unpatriotic. They're pushing Bitcoin as the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world. They're trying to undermine their country and their government overtly." And it's like, not trying to undermine our country. Bitcoin's actually great for our country, and Bitcoin is actually an extension of natural law. It's the greatest extension of natural law theory since the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Bitcoin embodies the ideals that this country was founded on, which are freedom of speech, freedom of property, and freedom of association, and freedom of sound money. Actually, sound money was one of the things that the founding fathers like made an imperative when they started the United States. And so Bitcoin is certainly anti-U.S. government in the sense that it's become extremely bloated. They're printing money out of thin air. They're going to wars that nobody wants to go to. Bitcoiners, American Bitcoiners, I'll speak for myself specifically, like I want to defund the government's ability to go do all that terrible stuff and misallocate capital. But that's not anti-American. It's actually very core to America's values that it was founded on. And also, with that being said, these people have painted themselves into a corner, and Bitcoin may be the only soft landing that they have. So the best thing they could do is just let Bitcoiners within America do what they need to do to attain as much Bitcoin as possible and build industry on the Bitcoin network.
Awesome, Mark. Thank you. I unfortunately have to run. One quick question, two quick questions. Firstly, again, reiterate where we can find you and hear about your stuff and learn more. And then, is there something like the average kind of newbie? Is there a source or something they could read? I mean, I thought Safe's book was pretty good. I mean, it's, my understanding. I mean, I always want to support other carnivores, that do this. But how should people go about getting their education on this? If they've kind of gotten interested in this by this podcast or other stuff, where do they go? What's the best way to start learning? And then how do they find you?
Yes. So another carnivore, if you want information from a carnivore, NakamotoInstitute.org. So it's Nakamoto, or excuse me, Naka Nakamoto, Nakamoto,
NAKAMOTO. Yeah.
Institute.org.
That's Michael Goldstein's, right?
Yeah, it's Michael's Goldstein. So if you go there, I would just start to get acquainted with how Bitcoin started and the conversations around Bitcoin. You go to the Complete Satoshi, and read just literally what Satoshi was talking about Bitcoin in the early days. And then beyond that, they have papers about cryptography and monetary policy. And then they have different articles that Michael and Pierre wrote about why Bitcoin's important. That's a great resource if you want to know like the high level, how did Bitcoin actually work, in a very short book. There's a book called Inventing Bitcoin that I would highly recommend picking up. It's a very easy read. You can read it within 2 hours and understand how the network actually works. Yeah, and then Twitter is a great source if you want to just get a fire hose of information. You can find me on Twitter at Marty Bent, and then I have a list that I've been sort of curating for years. You can look up my list and find the Bitcoin list and follow that if you just want to keep up to date with what people are talking about Bitcoin at any given point in time. Yeah, there's a bunch of podcasts out there. Bitcoin Audible. I run Tales from the Crypt. Stefan Lavera runs a good one. Safe has his Bitcoin Standard podcast. There's a wealth of information, and it's I will say it can be daunting. It is certainly daunting to look at how much information's out there and be like, where do I dive in? But just start somewhere and keep digging. Gradually, then Suddenly is another incredible blog series that I highly recommend. It's good for beginners as well. That's by Unchained Capital's Parker Lewis. So there's a wealth of information. I just fire hosed you there with some sources. I hope some of them were picked up. But yeah, no, thank you for having me on. You can find me at Marty Bent on Twitter, and tftc.io is my website where you can find my newsletter and podcast.
Awesome, Marty. Thank you very much for educating us. And like I said, hopefully everything will work well. Like I said, I've got to go. But anyway, guys, appreciate it. I think we may have Pierre Rocher coming on down the road too, another sort of innovator, I guess, in this space. But it's interesting. It's it's kind of interesting to see. Once you start going down that rabbit hole of challenging different dogmas, a lot of things start to line up. You start to question a lot of things, and this is also one of them that I've kind of gotten an interest in. And I think some of us, like I said, I'm not sure if you convinced everybody. I mean, I think there's still some people that are skeptical or but that's fine. I mean, that's the way things work. Okay, folks, I got to go. Thanks again, Marty. Appreciate it. Have a great day. And you guys, I'll see everybody back tomorrow now. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.